have to create rhythms and cadences in organizational life that give people an opportunity to surface what they are seeing, hearing, and learning, because that process is a very, very powerful forcing mechanism for individuals to surface what is relevant, what is new, what is meaningful, and to try and distill some insight from that.
Are you finding any of the fundamentals of business building shifting in today's age of AI?
Everything is just moving at this very accelerated pace, and in that period of time there's been a lot of VC roadkill. A lot of ideas have been backed and then very quickly subsumed by large incumbent tech organizations. And so in that environment, I think it's been incumbent upon us to be very clear about where we do have unique defensible advantage, where we have moats, and trying to be intellectually honest about sticking to those areas and not being drawn outside of our scope.
This episode is brought to you by Instant Impact. Instant Impact provides transformative talent solutions to small and mid-sized companies that are making between 30 and 500 hires each year. If your recruitment's giving you a headache and you don't know where to start, then give the team at Instant Impact a call or visit www.instant-impact.com for more information. Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About AI. I'm your host, Felix Mitchell. Now, most founders build one company in their whole career, maybe two. Imagine building dozens. The pattern recognition you develop about what actually makes a business succeed would be extraordinary. Now, Jasper Joyce is the CIO of Blenheim Chalcot, a venture studio that builds multiple companies simultaneously. They've accumulated insights that most leaders never get near, seeing what works at seed stage, at scale up, at maturity across different sectors. Now, the team at Blenheim Chalcot is embedded AI across their entire portfolio and some of their clients, learning what interventions create genuine value versus which are just productivity theatre. It's a compressed masterclass into what actually drives business success. So we're going to dive into what they've learned along the way. And we've got Jasper here to join us. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks very much, Felix, for having me.
So I wonder if you could give us a bit of a sort of more detailed insight into Blenheim Chalcot.
Yeah, so at Blenheim Chalcot, we describe ourselves as venture builders, which in practice, what that means is we invest in, start and grow companies. And we do that across a few main verticals. We've got a long pedigree in fintech, principally payments and lending. And then we also have a number of businesses in media tech, which is quite a broad church. So everything from one of the founding cricket teams of the Indian Premier League through to marketing attribution software. And then we've also got quite a strong edtech pedigree, number of businesses that deliver both training and also assessment in different kind of areas of the education sector, the professional education sector specifically. And what we do to support those businesses is that we try to free up early stage founders to spend their time and effort thinking about what is unique to them. So that means their product, their market, and their customer. And we support them in doing that by taking some of the more transferable aspects of setting up and running a business off their hands. And that means everything from sort of legal, tax, finance, through to property, HR, talent, L&D, we support through a suite of central services delivered out of both the UK and Mumbai, where we have a very big capability hub. And that really helps those founders and those leadership teams in the early stages of building a business to find product market fit quickly and then plug into the support of Blenheim Chalcot to scale their business and progress to something more mature and autonomous.
That's amazing. And you're doing this from idea phase, right?
Yeah, so we have a methodology that we call our emerging venture opportunity method, which we call EVO for short. And essentially what that means is we have a path to identify opportunities, and those opportunities often fall out of our existing portfolio of companies. Risks and opportunities that our portfolio companies will encounter often present to us as possible ideas for new things. And through our EVO process, we will quite quickly try to spin that idea into some sort of proof of concept and then a prototype, and then start to identify whether there's a chance of larger scale product market fit. And as we work through that EVO process, there might be funding available that idea can unlock to further progress, grow the team, and develop the product or solution further.
That's amazing. So you're kind of short-circuiting the really early stage idea testing, as well as providing that operational support.
That's right. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. And obviously, as you know, starting a business, any early stage organization, there's a huge amount of risk and things don't always work and there's wastage in that. So there's kind of a level of comfort that you have to have in the reality that lots of things won't find product market fit. I think within that, one of the things we're quite good at is taking the learning from it and sharing and dispersing that learning with the rest of the portfolio company. So there's never true wastage. There's always some sort of capability development. And because we're working in those verticals, it is often transferable learning. We try to be quite disciplined and only pursuing ideas in verticals where we believe we have some unfair advantage, some right to win by being BC. And that has, it's held Blenheim Chalcot in pretty good stead over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, you've done amazingly well as far as you can see from the outside. I think this learning piece is so important, and we'll get on to, I think, AI more generally, but I think definitely one of the differentiators between businesses that are succeeding and businesses that are struggling is their ability to create that learning feedback loop into their organization. And I would say it's a muscle that a lot of businesses don't have. I wonder if you can go into a little bit more detail around how you make sure that you take the value from your failures or things that haven't quite worked, as well as the things that are working. How does that all work?
It's a really, really good question. I think there's an aspect of this which is cultural. It's about the types of talent that you bring into the organization and into the environment, and them displaying that kind of high agency behavior and that tendency to want to dig deep and be curious about what is working and why it's working or not working. And obviously we do quite a lot to sort of screen for that and select for that in our talent process. But also we try to cultivate that through our in-house kind of learning and development programs, which we've always run, to try and give particularly early stage talent exposure to what they don't know, and try to sort of cultivate that learning appetite, because ultimately it's very difficult to achieve that learning culture unless at an individual level people are that way inclined and disposed. So there's a cultural aspect to it, and then there's the structural aspect to it, which is you have to create rhythms and cadences in organizational life that give people an opportunity to surface what they are seeing, hearing, and learning. And we do that through sort of very disciplined operating cadences. So just the rhythms at which a leadership team is expected to convene, your daily stand-ups, your weekly business reviews, your monthly business reviews, and the kind of cadence of board reporting. We find we are much, much more disciplined and demanding than a lot of external businesses in terms of the frequency and rigor with which companies are expected to report internally and to the board, because that process is a very, very powerful forcing mechanism for individuals to surface what is relevant, what is new, what is meaningful, and to try and distill some insight from that. And that process, we find, yields a lot of learning. And ultimately, in the kind of entrepreneurial game, pace is a vital characteristic. You have to be able to move quickly, ideally quicker than your competitors. And so having this sort of cadence culture drives a lot of that pace, drives the tempo. It's sort of the drumbeat by which many, many teams in Blenheim Chalcot will run.
So that's kind of the heartbeat of the organization. You've got your tempo. Sorry to get so practical. It's just really interesting. But do you force people to share learnings within, or do you encourage people to share learnings within that? Is it just looking at the OKRs and the results? Have you got a, this is what I've learned section as well?
Yeah, we will definitely have a, this is what we're learning section in some of those cadences. Obviously, it depends a little bit on the nature of the process, but just to give you a sort of candid example, we're obviously living through this amazing technological transformation at the moment. Just in the last 4 to 6 weeks, I think the products that Anthropic have released into the market are changing the way most knowledge economy professionals can do their job. And so very many of our team cadences will include sections on what amazing thing did you do personally with Claude today, right?
Wow.
And so that makes it very clear to anyone who's joining the organization, the expectation is that everybody here is rolling their sleeves up, using the tools themselves, seeing what's possible and sharing what's possible. So that's the sort of the micro, the granular day by day. And that's how little learnings get shared, because you see what's worked over here and someone says, yeah, I could really use that pattern over here. And then at a more macro level, we've obviously got cadences with which we bring together our business leaders, either around functional clusters or thematic clusters, so that they are exposed to one another's progress and learning, and they are proactive in offering help to support and enable their colleagues in other companies.
I guess there's you use that term unfair advantage, which I really like, but there's such an unfair advantage in having a group of companies, presumably at different stages of development, all with super bright people and all, at least from an ownership structure, aligned in terms of incentives, so you don't feel like you're going to get stabbed in the back by being really transparent with the people in the room. I can imagine that creates a very unique learning environment.
It does. I think, yeah, we're very privileged in this area. And I think one of the ways it manifests is if you have an earlier stage venture who's getting to the point in their product market fit journey where they are looking to, for example, scale their sales engine. They know that there's someone down the corridor who has got a revenue operations approach that they can probably on day one just template and try and recreate in their own environment, rather than reinventing the wheel and having to do this with an entirely blank sheet of paper. So yes, there's always sort of an organic opportunity for someone to grab some advice from someone based in usually the same building. We're based in this large scale space complex out in White City. So most people are no more than a few minutes walk away. And that does create this organic culture of people knowing there is help available. They feel free to ask for it. And that's a huge part of a learning culture, right? People shouldn't be defensive about what they don't know. They should be honest, and then they should be hungry to fill the gaps.
It's funny, isn't it? You bring up the sort of revenue engine side of things, which is very relevant to me personally at the moment. It's exactly what I'm doing in Instant Impact. That's my number one thing I want to achieve this year. I think one of the things that I've been struggling with is, you talk about having a template. There are so many templates out there. I mean, you could probably fill this room with books saying that they've got the number one formula secret to success for building a growth function. I guess part of the secret sauce would be, have you got your sort of, this is the BC accepted wisdom for this or that, and you say this is the blueprint that we think works?
We do in a number of areas, different sort of thematic or functional areas. We will have a particular school of thought or a particular method that we think is good. That doesn't necessarily mean we're always right, but there is value in commonality and not chopping and changing your approach too frequently, because that's what makes it possible to embed something. And so often with these frameworks, our view is it's just the discipline of actually doing it consistently with rigor over a sustained period of time that yields the outcome.
It's making something, isn't it?
Yeah, because something beats nothing, right? What you're looking for in those moments of maximum uncertainty and ambiguity is you're just looking for a map often. And all models are wrong. Some are useful. The same is true of a methodology or a playbook. And so just grabbing something that resonates and reconciles with your environment and then pursuing it consistently as a team with discipline, we feel it is the most important thing.
So I love that. I think that's absolutely huge. I wonder, you talk about we've spoken about shared learning, we've spoken about learning culture, and we've spoken about that sort of unfair advantage of having your peer group of organizations around. That feels like something that's probably always been true for Blenheim Chalcot. Are you finding any of the sort of fundamentals of business building shifting in today's age of AI?
I think we are. I think we're seeing, and when we talk about this age of AI, I think in our language, that means everything from sort of summer, autumn 2022 onwards, where we had the first consumable large language models land in our laps and sort of reveal their magic. I think since then, we have seen almost the entrepreneurial landscape on super speed. Everything is just moving at this very accelerated pace. And in that period of time, there's been a lot of, I think, VC roadkill. A lot of ideas have been backed and then very quickly subsumed by large incumbent tech organizations. And so in that environment, I think it's been incumbent upon us to be very clear about where we do have unique defensible advantage, where we have moats, and trying to be intellectually honest about sticking to those areas and not being drawn outside of our scope in that sense. So that's always a difficult balance to strike, because you have to keep your ears open to novel things that are happening in the world that might present opportunities. But equally, you've got to be mindful about where over a long period of time you do have a right to win.
And how do you think about those? How do you think about those moats, right? I think you mentioned the sort of VC roadkill and your Microsoft or Anthropics or OpenAI, whatever it is, being able to build that into their product suite. But I guess there's the other challenge, which is new businesses decided to use an Anthropic to build their own CRM or whatever it is, which feels like that's so much more of the way that very, very small businesses are thinking and very, very large businesses are thinking. In that kind of environment, what moats are really left?
Yeah, so I think a great question. I think, where does BC feel like it's got true differentiation and unfair advantage? We've always, as I was talking earlier about the BC model, is trying to free up founders and leadership teams to spend their time on what is unique to them, their product, their market, their customer, and we put that wraparound support for those earlier stage businesses for the more transferable aspects of business life. We also have this capability center in Mumbai, which provides really, really high quality resource that could be switched on kind of overnight to support people in pursuing projects and scaling their team. So those are things that are hard for others to replicate. So we do have a differentiation there and unfair advantage there. And then I think the other areas of differentiation come in sort of acquired know-how and capability in a specific vertical. So as I mentioned, Blenheim Chalcot has a long history of lending businesses. We do believe that we have a lot of intelligence and access and distribution channels that give us an advantage in the lending space. We also have knowledge of the regulation and compliance that's required to be successful there. So if you look back at successful Blenheim Chalcot businesses, they have often emerged from moments of regulatory discontinuity. Something has changed. There's been some turbulence in the economy or in a regulatory sector that has sort of opened the door for a new way of doing things. And often it's compliance with that new world order that gives you the right to compete that is hard for others to replicate. And so what we're seeing at the moment, you mentioned in terms of the sort of software space of people who are running small or large companies will say, well, rather than buying that really expensive software subscription, can my team just build it themselves using an Anthropic product? And we saw over the last 2 weeks, huge chunks coming out of the market capitalization of very, very valuable software companies and private equity backed software companies because of that sentiment. It was no longer defensible to be great at software, because now the barriers to doing that yourself, the marginal cost of doing that yourself are just much, much lower.
I wonder whether we could take it just a bit of a thought experiment. So for listeners today, they can think about how it applies to their businesses. Obviously, you've got your sectors, and you mentioned distribution channels, and where you've got access, and you've got your sectors where you've got great knowledge. If you were to, what do you think? So, what do you think for an organization like a solo organization, thinking about or being worried about getting impinged on by these large AI businesses? How should they be thinking about moat creation without the, I don't know, 10 business, however big the portfolio unfair advantages?
I suppose what the small businesses have in their favor is they are agile by nature, right? So every head you add to an organization, every human head you add to an organization increases the complexity of running that organization in an exponential way. So it's actually a huge advantage to have very lean teams, and that agility gives them the chance to move at pace, which their larger competitors will just naturally struggle with. So that's, I think, the first thing. And then I think the second thing is usually small organizations are very in touch with their customer. And one of the most valuable things in any business environment is truly understanding your customer and hearing from your customer in a candid, high touch, frequent way. And small businesses that are really plugged into what their customers think, feel, do, usually are able to evolve their products and services quickly to better meet the needs of those customers. So I think those are the two things that smaller businesses can lean into. And then the other thing that they might benefit from in this age of tools like OpenAI's ChatGPT and Anthropic's Claude is the marginal cost of adding these cognitive skills to their business is now negligible. Like you can bring in world leading advice from Claude at basically no cost. In the old days as a small business, you might have had to go and source a very experienced senior professional with lots of tenure, which would have cost you a huge amount of money. So I do think that creates an environment which is more competitive naturally, and that hopefully should be energizing and encouraging for small business leaders.
Because I think one of the really interesting facets of BC is that you've actually, as a group, you're quite significant. Like you're a large organizer, you're a big employer, and yet you're able to spin out these very, very highly entrepreneurial, fast-moving, agile, new businesses. For a larger business looking to succeed today, what are some of the things that they can learn from that approach on how to innovate despite being a larger bureaucracy?
I think, yeah, it's a great question. And it is something actually we've come up against, or come across rather, quite a lot over the last few years. In sort of autumn 2022, we launched a Centre for Gen AI Innovation. And part of the purpose of that Centre for Gen AI Innovation was sort of opening our doors to family and friends of BC who work in other environments to come and see what this technology could deliver. And we could learn a bit from them about what their journey had been, but we could show them what was possible in a agile, fast-moving environment. And I think one of the things we learned from that experience is that a lot of corporations struggle with innovation because innovation is in-housed. And innovation directives are set in an environment where the incentives aren't meaningfully different for those that are pursuing innovation, the structures aren't meaningfully different, and the cultures aren't meaningfully different. So what I mean about incentives is, for somebody to pursue something truly disruptive and transformative, they need to feel the pleasure and pain of success and failure. That's sort of vital facet of the environment. And often in a corporate setting, someone might still be comfortably employed and compensated, irrespective of whether or not their innovation is successful or not. So that's the incentives piece. I think the cultural piece is that you are trying to create an environment where mistakes are tolerable. It's exploratory. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but you need to make those mistakes very quickly. You need to move at pace, and you need to be able to learn from that. And that is a mindset and a set of behaviors that isn't always natural in a more kind of risk-averse, bureaucratic, administratively heavy environment. And then finally, when we talk about structures, I think core business, i.e. the non-innovation, the non-exploratory stuff, is always about optimizing fine margins to maximize profitability. Ultimately, that's what you're trying to do with your core business. And that's a very exploitative way of operating. And the structures that you put in place operationally are usually quite finely calibrated, and there isn't a lot of scope for experimentation and novelty. And so there's some benefits of releasing the shackles in an innovation environment to make it possible for people to play around with new ways of doing things. That has never been more true than in this AI-enabled environment, where processes, workflows, policies can now be transformed. Whereas if you are wedded to the enterprise structure and the way the enterprise has been doing things for several years, it can actually be really hard to take advantage of those new technological capabilities. And that's the structural piece that I'm talking about.
And I guess practically then, I hear you're talking about the sort of, there are those two pieces, the sort of cultural, the structural. Those things can be really hard to change in a legacy organization. There's I always remember we have been doing work for years with Octopus Energy and got some exposure to Octopus Group. And one of the things that I always found really cool is that there was an Octopus Labs that they had. I'm not sure if it still exists, but we were supporting them with some of their hiring of entrepreneurial folks. But they had them in a completely different office, and they thought that separation between the Octopus investment, as it was, that was the main part of the Octopus Group before. Obviously now it's Octopus Energy. They wanted to have that separation between the two cultures, so that they could have one which was structurally much less exploitative. They didn't use that term, but I love that. I think that's really key. So if you're a sort of legacy organization, have you seen maybe within BC or within other organizations examples of how they make that creativity work despite the...
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think there's lots of corporate examples where the way of mitigating all of these risks has been to set up something new. So that might be a standalone legal entity, or it might be an entity kind of within the group, but with its own protections and provisions. And that independence, and that might be an independence that affects who they're reporting to, who they're governed by, how the investment purse strings are being controlled, is often essential because it means there's no cross-contamination of the exploratory and the exploitative, which can be dangerous in both directions. That ambidexterity, being able to do both at the same time, is really hard, and cross-contamination is a risk. So sometimes just creating a clean break is the best way forward. And that's something we've done at Blenheim Chalcot, where actually we will sometimes launch a new venture through our emerging venture opportunity program to pursue something that might have become apparent to us or visible to us through an existing established portfolio.
And you have to say, it's not right to do this through the portfolio company. We want something new.
That's right. And someone has to take the call, and that's a leap of faith, ultimately. Someone has to take the call that this stands a better chance of success if it is in its own environment, able to operate differently, and the team can be really incentivized around that new pursuit and everything, all the challenges and opportunities that come with that.
How interesting is that? Well, we are running out of time a little bit, so I have to ask you, what are you most excited about on the one hand, and on the other hand, worried about on a 3-year time horizon?
I think on a 3-year time horizon, and 3 years feels like an incredibly long time. If you kind of, I was going to go 5, and I was like, I can't even fit out. But I honestly, I'm thinking more sort of 3 months, because just
let's do 3 months.
Yeah, the pace of change technologically is just so immense, and the trickle through to the economy remains to be seen. But I think what's incredibly energizing and exciting is if you have high agency, if you have curiosity, if you have vision and ideas about what you want to achieve in your existing company or a new thing, the speed with which you can now explore and pursue that, and the cost at which you can do so, is just mind-blowing. It's such an exciting moment for creative, visionary people with that work ethic. The other side of this coin is that nobody knows exactly what this will mean for the contemporary organization. How does this change the role of different functions within a business? What's expected of them? The sort of change they should be driving and governing, the risks they've got to guard against, that remains a hugely unknown area. I think one thing that we're doing at Blenheim Chalcot in our EdTech portfolios, we have a business called Avado, which is probably the leading provider of CIPD qualifications for HR professionals in the UK and globally. And they are actually doing a lot of work with people leaders across the economy on how they can drive this AI-enabled change, because often it comes to people and operations leaders to be responsible for the organization design, the capabilities of their people, and they can benefit quite a lot from being exposed to this new technological capability and supported on that journey through training, which is perhaps not available to them in such a targeted, functionally specific way in other areas. So that's something that we see being absolutely critical for incumbent businesses, is to expose their people to this new tech, put it in their hands so that they feel liberated and empowered by it, and able to drive that change in the direction they want for their company.
Well, I think that's a really good note to wind up on, Jasper. Thanks so much for joining and being so transparent with all the amazing things you're doing at BC.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me.